He left her for a girl he called his future. And he did it without ever knowing that the woman he was leaving was the richest black woman in the city of Houston. On the surface, that evening at Meridian Restaurant looked like a celebration. 40 guests, candlelight, a room full of people watching Kwame Adeyemi raise his glass. But what Kwame did not know, what no one at that table knew as the applause broke around them, was that the $47 million at the center of his toast, the anchor investment that was about to make him the most important black developer in Houston's history, belonged entirely to his wife. Naomi Adeyemi sat at the far end of the table, her glass lifted, her face composed. 3 seats from her, a woman named Priya, young, polished, present with the particular confidence of someone who believes she has already won, watched Kwame perform his triumph. Abena, his mother, sat close enough to the warmth of the moment to claim ownership of it, nodding with the satisfaction of a woman who had waited a very long time to feel vindicated. The sound of 40 glasses touching filled the restaurant at once. Naomi did not speak. She did not know yet, not the full number, not what it meant. That part was still coming. This isn't just a story about a man who called another woman his future. It's about what happens when a life built in silence finally speaks, and an entire room goes still. If this story is for you, please like and subscribe before we go any further. And drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Because to understand what Naomi was actually holding in that room, and why she hadn't touched it yet, we have to go back to a kitchen in Sugar Land, Texas, and a man named Kofi Osi, who understood something about power that his daughter was only just beginning to learn. The Sugar Land kitchen would come. But first, there was still that evening to finish. Meridian's room had resumed its rhythm, silverware against porcelain, 40 conversations folding back into themselves, and Kwame had settled into the table the way he always did. Slowly, with the practiced ease of a man who understood that a room was always an audience. Naomi was reaching for her water glass when Abena appeared beside her chair. "You look tired," Abena said. She rested one hand lightly on Naomi's shoulder, the gesture of a woman who had learned to make contact feel like examination. "The weight isn't helping, you know. People notice these things, especially at events like this. His colleagues notice." Naomi did not look up immediately. Her hand stayed on the glass. "I'm fine, Abena," she said. "I'm just saying what I see." Abena tilted her head. The smile arrived a half-beat after it should have. "One has to think about what a man at Kwame's level actually needs, visibly." She patted Naomi's shoulder once, small, final, and moved away toward Kwame's end of the table. No one at the surrounding seats had looked up. Not one. Naomi set her glass down carefully. She kept her hands folded in her lap, where no one could see what they were doing. She watched her husband work the room, watched the angle of his body, relaxed, expansive, tilted toward whoever was speaking as though they were the only person present. She had loved that about him once, the way he made a room feel chosen. 3 seats away, Priya Mehta sat with her wine glass held near the base, fingers loose, posture calibrated the way expensive things are calibrated, to look effortless. She was oriented toward Kwame without leaning. Not obviously leaning, but oriented in the specific way of someone who had learned exactly how close was too close and had mapped the distance carefully. A memory surfaced, one Naomi didn't choose. The last time Kwame had tilted his body toward her with that particular ease, she had been 7 months pregnant with Emeka. She could not clearly recall the months after that. She looked away. The drive home was quiet. Kwame checked his phone at 2 red lights. He spoke about Marcus Reed, the project attorney, and something about Thursday's timeline. He used Priya's name once, placed inside a sentence about a legal clause, casual and almost architectural. He did not notice he had said it. Naomi heard it land. She watched the highway lights slide across the windshield and said nothing at all. Inside the house, Kwame went upstairs without turning back. Naomi stood in the kitchen with the lights off. The refrigerator hummed. Through the ceiling came the small, ordinary sound of Emeka turning in his sleep. One shift, then stillness. She pressed one palm flat against the counter and breathed. She was not angry. Not yet. What she felt was more precise than anger. The specific sensation of a pattern completing itself, the last piece settling into place, and understanding that she had been standing inside the picture the whole time without ever seeing its edges. She thought, briefly, of her father's journal, the worn leather one he kept in the bottom drawer of the mahogany desk in the Sugarland house. She had not opened it in 2 years. She didn't know why she thought of it now. She turned off the kitchen tap she hadn't noticed she'd left running. She went upstairs. She lay in the dark beside a man already asleep and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Something had shifted. She could not name it yet. But it had. Somewhere past 2 a.m, Naomi's body gave up the argument and let her sleep. Her mind did not stop. It pulled her back the way it always had when the present became too much to hold. Back through years, through rooms, through the particular smell of the Sugarland house on a Sunday when her father had the windows open. Kofi Osi had arrived in Houston in 1979 with $40, a suitcase, and a philosophy he had worked out somewhere over the Atlantic. That the most dangerous thing a man could do in a new country was to be seen too clearly, too soon. He started in construction supplies, modest quantities, reliable delivery, a reputation built on the simple fact that he showed up when he said he would. He bought his first commercial parcel in 1986, a strip of warehouse space near the ship channel that the seller had priced for desperation. Kofi paid cash. He told no one. By the time Naomi was old enough to notice that other fathers came home talking about what they owned, and her father came home talking about everything else, she understood this was deliberate. The Sugarland house was 4 bedrooms and a wraparound porch, comfortable without announcing itself. The carpet was replaced when it needed replacing. The car was chosen for reliability, not appearance. Nothing in that house announced what the man inside it was worth. That was precisely the point. She asked him once, as a teenager, why he never talked about the business. He set down his fork. The dining room smelled like jollof rice and the early dark of a November evening. He looked at her the way he looked at everything, fully, without hurry. "Money is a language," he said. "Learn to speak it softly and speak it last." She wrote it in the back of her school notebook. She didn't know then what it meant. She would spend the next 20 years finding out. Kofi was diagnosed in January, 2 months after Naomi's 30th birthday. Pancreatic. The word arrived the way such words do. Clinical, irrevocable, rearranging everything it touched. He did not panic. He called his attorney, James Obie of Obie and Associates on Richmond Avenue, and spent the following 4 months completing what he had always been building, not just a portfolio, but a protection. Sable and Crown Ventures was established in February. All 29 parcels transferred into the holding company's name, Naomi listed as sole principal. Her assets were separate property under Texas law, structured deliberately to remain that way, predating the marriage by years, untouched by it. Dr. Serena Atta, who had managed Kofi's investments for 11 years, was appointed as steward. His instruction to her was specific. Send Naomi quarterly summaries, keep the language clear, and unless she asks for the full picture, do not give it. He knew his daughter. He knew she would honor this instruction the way she had honored everything he taught her, by never asking. He died in May. Naomi sat with him through the last 3 days, in a room on the 14th floor of Houston Methodist on Fannin Street, holding his hand and listening to the sound of his breathing change. She did not cry in front of him. She breathed alongside him, and when it was over, she sat in the parking garage for 45 minutes before she could make herself drive home. That summer, James Obie walked her through the portfolio inventory. 29 parcels across Houston. Kofi had added 2 in his final months. Quiet acquisitions completed through Serena, while he was still lucid enough to direct them. The list was long. Naomi's eyes moved down it slowly. Near the bottom, between a row of industrial properties in Pasadena and a retail block in the Heights, was a building listed as 4400 Commerce Row, South End, Houston. Current annual lease income, $872,000. She noted it. She filed the documents. She did not think about it again. The years moved. She had met Kwame the previous spring at a Howard alumni dinner in Washington. He was finishing his law degree and talking about Houston the way people talk about a place they intend to conquer. He looked at Naomi across the table, with the full attention of a man accustomed to being looked at, who was genuinely surprised to find someone more interesting to look at. He was warm in those days. Curious. He asked questions, and meant them. He held her hand at Dulles Airport the night before she stopped leaving, and she felt something she hadn't expected, the specific ease of being known by someone and not minding. They moved into the Meyerland house in the 2nd year. One evening they stood on the back balcony in the late Houston summer, the city laid out around them, the air thick and still, and Kwame folded his hand around hers. "We're going to build something here," he said. She believed him. She believed every word. Neither of them knew, standing on that balcony, what was already built beneath the city they were looking out over. What was already hers. What had already been waiting, in silence, for a reason to speak. And Kwame, in those early years before the business cards multiplied and the ambition hardened, was still the man who wanted to build it with her. He would not always be. The change was not a door closing. It was a window left open too long, through which something essential slowly left until neither of them could name exactly when the house had become different. In the 3rd year of the marriage, Kwame made partner. New cards. A new floor on Post Oak Boulevard, where the view stretched far enough that the city appeared to belong to whoever was standing at the window. His name appeared in the Chronicle, then in city council briefings, then in conversations where Naomi was the only person at the table not already tracking his career. He was building something. This was true. And the story he told about what he was building, quietly at first, then with the rehearsed fluency of a man who had repeated a version of himself until it became autobiography, was a story in which he had built it alone. Naomi sat beside him at the events and stood near him at the receptions. She did not require acknowledgement. She believed this was partnership. The first time he corrected her was at a dinner party at the home of Leon and Patricia Asare, a Saturday evening in the 4th year. She had been making a point, she could no longer recall what point, when Kwame's voice cut across hers, smooth and redirecting, and the table moved on before she could locate what had happened. She filed it privately as a single lapse. It happened again 3 weeks later, then at a firm lunch, then at their own dining room table with no audience at all. She stopped finishing sentences in rooms where he might finish them first, and she told herself this was accommodation. She did not yet understand it as erasure. Then there was Abina, whose comments had always existed but grew more precise with the years, finding their edges the way persistent things do. At Christmas, her hand landing on Naomi's shoulder. "You might try the fitness center Kwame joined, darling," For energy, not weight, though one does notice. At Easter, a man at his level needs a wife who shows up looking the part. One say this with love. At Amika's 4th birthday, under the cover of children's noise, she carries it all in the middle, but there's nothing to be done. Kwame was present at every one of these moments. He did not correct his mother once. Naomi drove home in silence afterward. She stood at the bathroom mirror long after the house went quiet and looked at her full face, her soft shoulders, the rounded stomach that had carried Amika and been neither thanked nor remarked upon, and she searched herself for what Abena was seeing. She didn't find it, but she kept looking. In the 5th year, Kwame told her he was simplifying their finances. The joint accounts, the monthly transfers, it would be cleaner to route household investments through the Meridian Mile Development Partners LLC directly. She wouldn't need to track it. The implication, carried in the particular patience with which he explained it, was that she was not equipped to anyway. She signed where he asked. She called this trust. What the audience already knows, and what Kwame did not, is that while he redirected their money into a project he believed was entirely his own, the $47 million anchor investment that would make it possible was already sitting in documents bearing a different name, not Adeyemi. Ose. He had never asked about the name she had before she became his. She found the receipt in October. It was in the inside pocket of a blazer she had pulled from the closet for the dry cleaner. A Thursday morning errand, ordinary as they came. A hotel on Westheimer. The date was a Thursday in late March. Kwame had told her he was in Dallas that Thursday. The name on the charge was his. She stood in the hallway and read it twice. Then she folded it along its original crease and returned it to the pocket and put the blazer back on its hanger. She went back to the kitchen. She finished the rice she had started. She moved through the rest of that evening with her hands occupied and her face composed and something quietly, completely rearranging itself somewhere she could not show anyone. Over the months that followed, other things surfaced. A second profile on their streaming account, listed as TK Priya, that appeared and vanished without explanation. Priya's name at the dinner table with increasing frequency, always neutral, always professional. At a firm reception at the Four Seasons on Lamar, Naomi stood to Kwame's left for 90 minutes, said the right things to the right people, and watched from across the room as Priya held her wine glass near the base and angled her body toward wherever Kwame moved. A calibration so practiced it barely registered as movement at all. Naomi drove home alone that evening. She told herself she was imagining it. She increased her effort, more at home, more questions, more presence, and constructed a theory of herself as the problem. Not attentive enough, not interesting enough, not present enough in the life they were supposed to be building together. She cooked on Sundays and carried Emeka on her hip and tried to re-enter a version of the marriage she was no longer certain existed. She still loved him. This was true, and it was costing her in ways she could not yet measure. She chose patience. She chose it every day for 3 more years. And while she was choosing, somewhere outside her view, someone was calculating exactly what that patience was worth, and deciding it could be used against her. What Naomi could not see was that the calculation had already begun. 3 months before the Meridian dinner, Kwame had walked into the offices of Parrish, Cole, and Reed on Travis Street and sat down with a family law attorney named Jeffrey Ware. The meeting was listed in his calendar as a consultation. He had already had 3. What Ware's office required was a legal portrait of Naomi as financially dependent, professionally absent, and emotionally fragile enough to make a custody argument viable. Kwame began supplying the material. In September, the bank account changed. Naomi was at the HEB on West Gray on a Tuesday morning. Milk, Amika's cereal, the washing powder she'd bought at that same store since the year they moved into the Meyerland house, when her card declined at the register. She looked at the cashier, a young man whose name tag read Marcus, with the specific stillness of someone who does not yet understand what has just happened to them. She paid cash for the milk. She left the rest. She called the bank from the parking lot. The account had been restructured. A Mr. K. Adeyemi had authorized the change in account holders on September 14th. Naomi was no longer listed. She sat in the Lexus for 12 minutes. She did not cry. She drove home. Across the city, Abina had begun making calls. She reached Kwame's cousin Bernard and Patricia Asare, and two women from Naomi's church circle whose numbers Abina had collected over the years without ever explaining why. The version of events she circulated described Naomi as not quite herself lately, as struggling, as withdrawn in ways that worried everyone. She never used the word unstable. She placed it in the space between her other words and let it germinate on its own. Abina had always understood that the most effective damage is the kind that looks like concern. Naomi began to notice that people who had been warm became careful. Phone calls went unreturned. She was tired in those months in a way that sleep did not address. Her clothes had loosened, the weight leaving not as an achievement, but as a surrender, the body releasing what it could no longer afford to hold. She moved through her days with her jaw set and her hands occupied, and she tried to keep her face clear when Emeka was watching, which was often. He was 8, and he noticed everything. One morning he stood in the kitchen doorway in his school uniform, shoes already on, shirt tucked, prepared in the way he had taught himself to be prepared, and watched her pour his cereal with an expression that asked a question his mouth didn't form. He kissed her cheek at the door with a care that was precise and deliberate, as though he understood something needed holding gently. The softness of it moved through her chest and stayed. She would not let him grow up watching his mother disappear. She held that. It was something solid in a season when most things had become uncertain. The petition draft was in Kwame's home office, inside a folder labeled Property Research. She had been looking for their homeowner's insurance documents on a Wednesday evening in October. She was not looking for anything else. The document was 12 pages. She read the first 4. The language was precise and impersonal. Non-contributing dependent spouse. No independent professional profile. No demonstrated financial capability. Emotional state potentially relevant to custodial determination. She read the word dependent 3 times. She sat in Kwame's chair at Kwame's desk in the office of the house she had believed was theirs, and she held the word carefully in her mind, the way you hold something whose weight you are still measuring. She put the folder back exactly as she had found it. She went to the kitchen and called her sister, Amaka, who lived 12 minutes away in Bel Air, and who had always understood Naomi better than anyone, except possibly their father. She did not tell Amaka everything. She said only that she needed to talk. Amaka stayed on the phone with her for 40 minutes, mostly listening, and Naomi was grateful for every silent minute of it. She did not call a lawyer. Not yet. She did not know, could not have known, standing in her kitchen that evening, that 3 miles away, Kwame was on the phone with Priya. His voice dropped below the register Naomi would have caught from upstairs. He was telling her the filing timeline had moved up, that it would be completed before the project launch. Priya said that was good. That was exactly what she said. That was good. Naomi was still on the phone with Amaka when that conversation ended. By the time she went to bed, the word dependent had been inside her chest for 4 hours. It did not sit like an injury. It sat like a clarification. The specific moment when you understand that what you have been enduring was not accidental, not seasonal, not something that could be corrected by trying harder or loving more carefully. Someone had looked at her life, her marriage, and her son, and decided that what she was could be named in 12 pages and used against her. This was not erosion. This was architecture. And whoever had built it had made one very significant miscalculation. The miscalculation did not reveal itself in any of the places where the architecture of those months had been built. It revealed itself on a Sunday evening in November in the kitchen of the house on Crestwood Drive. Naomi was making chin-chin. She had been making it since early afternoon, the dough worked by hand, the careful cutting, the oil warming on the stove, because Emeka had asked for it the week before, and she had said she would, and she kept the promises she made to him even in weeks when keeping anything felt effortful. The kitchen smelled of frying dough and cardamom. Her hands were dusted white. Upstairs, Emeka was asleep. Kwame came to the kitchen doorway and said her name. She looked up. She registered his posture before his expression, the particular stillness of a man who has rehearsed what he is about to do. She turned the heat down on the oil. She wiped her hands on her apron. She left the flour. She followed him into the living room. He had arranged the room. She understood this in the moment before he began speaking. His chair angled toward hers, a document on the coffee table face down, but present. He stated the settlement with the measured cadence of a man who wants to seem reasonable. The house, one vehicle, $180,000 from the joint account. He used the word generous. He said it the way people say words they have tested for reaction in front of a mirror. The front door opened. Abena came in without knocking. She had a key. Naomi had never thought to reclaim it. She stood inside the doorway in her gray coat, hands folded at her waist, and looked at Naomi with the expression she had worn at every Christmas, every Easter, every gathering across 8 years, the expression of a woman whose verdict was decided long ago and is only now being formally delivered. "You have never truly fit this life," Abena said. Not unkindly. That was the precision of it. "Kwame needs someone who can grow with him. You've always known this, I think." Nobody moved. Then Kwame said it. He said it the way he had delivered everything difficult in the last 2 years, with the practiced calm of a man who has tried the sentence on another audience first and found that it holds. "I need someone who matches where I'm going," he said. "Priya is my future." The words entered the room and did not echo. They simply occupied it. Naomi stood with flour still on her hands, in the living room of the house she had cooked in and cleaned and raised Emeka in for 7 years, and she did not speak. Her chest had tightened into something dense and immovable. She could feel the flour on her knuckles, dry, specific, present, and she focused on that because it was something she could locate while everything else rearranged itself around her. Kwame's cousin Bernard was in the house that evening. He had arrived an hour earlier to return a borrowed set of keys and had been invited to stay, and now he stood in the hallway that opened onto the living room and said nothing at all. He looked at the floor. He did not look at Naomi. No one in that room spoke for her. Her gaze moved to the window. The street outside was ordinary. A neighbor's car in a driveway, a sprinkler still running in the early dark. She stood looking at it for a long moment. There is something the audience should hold while she does. While this man called another woman his future, his firm had been paying rent every quarter, without exception, to a holding company called Sable and Crown Ventures. The building at 4400 Commerce Row, South End, Houston. $872,000 a year, delivered to Naomi Adeyemi. Not Adeyemi, Ose. The name on every lease, every renewal, every document his firm had ever signed. He did not know. He had never thought to ask. And now the audience waits. Kwame and Abena moved toward the back of the house, their voices already low, resuming something Naomi was not part of. She stood where she was for a moment after they left the room. Then she walked back into the kitchen. The chin-chin had cooked too long on one side. The flour was still on the counter, on the apron, on the backs of her hands. She turned off the burner. She went to the sink. She turned on the tap and held her hands beneath it and watched the flour dissolve and run, white threads circling the drain, slow and then gone, until her hands were clean and the water ran clear. She dried them on the dish towel. She did not cry. She did not speak. She did not make a sound the people in the other rooms could have followed. She stood at the sink for a long time, looking at her own hands. Clean now. Still. She did not sleep well on Sunday. Monday's sleeplessness was different, quieter, more deliberate, the wakefulness of a person who has stopped waiting and does not yet know what they are about to begin. On Tuesday evening, she told Kwame she was going out. She did not say where. She drove west until the city loosened and the streets widened into older neighborhoods, where houses still have room between them. The Sugarland house was dark when she arrived. She had not been back since finding the petition. She stood on the porch a moment before unlocking the door, registering what she had not expected. The house had not changed. Kofi's porch. Kofi's door. The interior smell she could not name, but had known all her life. She went in. She did not turn on many lights. Kofi's study was at the back of the house. She sat in his chair at the mahogany desk, placed her hands flat on the surface, and looked at the wall. Then she opened the bottom drawer. The leather journal was exactly where it had always been. She lifted it out and opened it to the last entry. Kofi's handwriting was small and deliberate, each letter formed with care. The entry was undated. The last line read, "Money is a language. Learn to speak it softly, and speak it last." She had heard those words first as a teenager at this house's dining room table, and understood them as an instruction about patience, about the wisdom of not displaying what you have. She had lived by them faithfully. She had spoken softly for 15 years, through a marriage and a loss and a systematic erasure of her own professional life. She had been so committed to the first part that she had not noticed the second part was still waiting. Speak it last. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she closed the journal. She did not put it back. She picked up her phone and called Dr. Serena Atta. "I need the full accounting," she said when Serena answered. "Not the quarterly summary, every number, every parcel, every entity in the holding structure." She had never asked for this in 10 years. She asked for it now with the steadiness of someone who finally understands what they have been carrying. A brief pause on the line. Then Serena said, "I'll be there in the morning." She arrived at 8:15 with a leather portfolio, which she set on the kitchen table without announcement, opened without comment, and laid flat without explanation. She let Naomi read. The number was at the bottom of the first page. $284 million. Current appraised value. 29 commercial parcels across Houston. Naomi read it. She read it again. She turned the page. The parcel inventory was detailed. Addresses, asset codes, annual lease income, renewal dates. She moved through it carefully. Past the industrial block in Pasadena. Past the Heights retail strip. And there, on line 22 of 29, 4400 Commerce Row, South End, Houston. Annual lease income, $872,000. She knew that address. She had seen it on a business card years ago, in the inside pocket of Kwame's blazer, and had not thought about it since. She looked up at Serena. "The Meridian Mile anchor investment," she said. "That's mine too, isn't it?" Serena nodded once. "And the clause?" "It's in the original agreement," Serena said. "Section 7, 100. Any material change in project leadership requires anchor investor approval. The divorce petition constitutes a material change. A pause, brief and precise. He filed it himself. He triggered it himself. Naomi looked at the printed page. Then she folded it once, along a clean line, and set it at the edge of the table. She called Vivian Clark. "My name is Naomi Adeyemi," she said when Vivian answered. "I hold 29 commercial parcels through Sable and Crown Ventures, valued at $284 million. My husband has filed for divorce, and I need Section 7100 of the Meridian Mile Investment Agreement invoked before the project briefing." A single beat of silence. "Which firm is representing him?" Vivian said. "Parrish, Cole, and Reed." "I know them." A pause. "I'll need the investment agreement and the full portfolio documentation. Dr. Serena Atta will send everything today." "Then we're ready," Vivian said. "I'll be in touch." The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Naomi sat at the kitchen table for a time after it ended. The Sugarland house held its quiet around her, the particular quiet of a place that has been waiting. The leather journal lay on the table beside the open portfolio, the two objects side by side. One the instrument of her inheritance, one the philosophy that had governed it. She stood. She walked through the house and out the front door onto Kofi's porch. The street was still. The evening had not yet fully settled. She locked the front door. She put the key in her pocket. She was not leaving because she had no other choice. She was leaving because everything that needed doing next was waiting for her somewhere other than here. She walked to the car. The Houston Development Authority's third-floor conference room had 3 glass walls and a view of the downtown skyline, and Kwame had chosen it deliberately. He had chosen the room, arranged the chairs, selected the journalists. 3 of them positioned around the oval table like witnesses at a coronation, which was, in his understanding, exactly what this was. He was mid-sentence when the doors opened. He had been speaking for 14 minutes and had not yet reached his best material. The room was his. Councilwoman Diana Ford, of District H, sat at the far end of the table with 2 staffers and a notepad. Marcus Reed, his project attorney, had the financial summary open in front of him. Priya Mehta sat to Kwam's right with the alert, self-possessed ease of someone performing competence for the benefit of multiple audiences simultaneously. Claire Whitfield of the Houston Business Chronicle had her recorder running and her pen moving. The doors opened at 11:14. Kwame turned. Naomi Adeyemi walked in. She was followed by Vivian Clark, who carried a flat leather document case and moved with the specific, unhurried authority of someone who has appeared in rooms like this 100 times and found none of them impressive. Behind Vivian came a man Kwame did not recognize, Richard Aduse, whose card, as he settled into his seat, identified him as a formal representative of Sable and Crown Ventures. Kwame stopped speaking. He stopped the way a structure stops when something foundational has been removed. Not collapse, just the immediate recognition that the physics have changed. He looked at Naomi. He looked at Marcus Reed. Marcus Reed was already looking at him with an expression Kwame had never seen on his face before. Marcus Reed was a composed man by professional necessity. He was not composed now. Naomi did not look at Kwame. She settled into the chair Vivian had positioned for her. Not at the head of the table, not at its edge, but at the precise center of one side, as though she had calculated the geometry before entering the room. She placed her folder on the table. She folded her hands on top of it. She looked at the room with the particular steadiness of someone who has arrived exactly where they intended to be. Vivian Clark stood. "My name is Vivian Clark of Clark and Associates," she said. Her voice was level and without preamble. "I represent Naomi Adeyemi ne Ose, present today as the sole principal of Sable and Crown Ventures." She laid a document flat on the table and slid it forward. Sable and Crown Ventures is the anchor investor in the Meridian Mile project. $47 million, committed in writing under the investment agreement signed in March of this year. The silence that settled was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a room in the middle of understanding something it cannot yet fully hold. Councilwoman Ford's pen stopped. Marcus Reed lifted the document. Priya had gone very still, her eyes moving between Vivian and the page. Vivian placed a second document on the table. Sable and Crown Ventures is invoking Section 7-100 of the signed investment agreement. Any material change in project leadership circumstances requires advance approval from the anchor investor. The divorce petition filed 14 days ago by Mr. Adeyemi constitutes a material change. The clause was triggered at filing. Anchor investor approval has not been granted. She let the document stand. Claire Whitfield opened her laptop. Vivian set a third document on the table. The full portfolio inventory, 29 pages, certified and tabbed. For the record, and for the purposes of full disclosure relevant to this project, the complete holdings of Sable and Crown Ventures. She sat down. She did not explain the pages. She let the room read. The irony arrived the way it always arrives when it has been patient long enough, quietly, completely, and all at once. 29 parcels, $284 million, line by line, the Pasadena Industrial Block, the Heights Retail Strip, the Northside Commercial Corridor. And there, on line 22 of 29, 4400 Commerce Row, South End, Houston. The building where Kwame Adeyemi had gone to work every morning for 7 years, his firm's address. The building whose lease his office manager processed without remark, whose landlord was listed in Sable and Crown Ventures' name on documents his firm had signed at inception and once on renewal, 3 years into his marriage. He had been paying rent to his wife for every year of it, not to her married name, to her birth name, to Osei. He had never asked, had never thought to ask, because a man who has decided his wife is nothing does not read the name on his own lease. Marcus Reed set the page down. David Chu, a journalist at the corner of the table, leaned quietly toward Claire Whitfield. She nodded without looking up from her keyboard. Councilwoman Ford picked up her phone. She had already moved her eyes to Priya's side of the table before Priya's chair had finished its adjustment. Priya had read the room. She did it the way she did everything, efficiently, without announcement. Her posture did not collapse. It redirected. By the time Marcus Reed set his page down, Priya's chair had moved, not much, perhaps 3 inches, away from Kwame and angled fractionally toward the section of the table that held the other firm representatives. The movement was small enough that a person not attending might have missed it. No one at that table missed it. Absence, when it is chosen, is its own kind of statement. Councilwoman Ford watched it happen and wrote something in her notepad that no one else could read. Kwame stood. He crossed to where Naomi sat, and the room let him, because what was happening now was between them and everyone present understood it. He stopped in front of her. The performance had left his face entirely. This was not the Kwame of the Meridian dinner or the Sunday living room. This was something closer to the voice from a balcony in Meyerland 15 years ago that had once asked her to build something with him. There was real recognition in his face, and the narrator marks this because it was real. Not calculation, not performance, but the specific stillness of a man who has understood, finally, what he discarded. "We can fix this," he said. "We can fix all of this, Naomi. Just tell me what you want." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to face him fully, and the room went still. "I already own what I want, Kwame," she said. "I always have." 12 words, delivered without theater, without cruelty, without any register that required a response. The room received them the way rooms receive things that rearrange understanding permanently, in silence and completely. She gathered her folder, rose, and walked to the door. Behind her, Councilwoman Ford speaking into her phone in the low, official tone of someone setting a process in motion. Claire Whitfield typing. Marcus Reed at Kwame's side, speaking in the rapid, contained voice of counsel that had become urgent and specific. The room reorganizing itself around the new fact, the way rooms always do. Naomi pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. She stepped through. The world doesn't stop when the document falls. It reorganizes. This took a few weeks. The Meridian Mile project moved forward under renegotiated terms. Sable and Crown's board appointed a new development lead. Professionals Naomi had quietly verified before signing anything. Kwame's name remained on the file as originating project attorney, noted in all the correct places. In Houston's development community, where context travels quickly and without announcement, the credit registered differently than he had imagined it would. The Houston Business Chronicle published its follow-up feature in December. The headline named Naomi. There was a photograph, her hands around a cup of tea near Discovery Green, her expression composed and direct. She had read the piece twice and found it accurate. She had not called the journalist. Priya accepted a position in Dallas within the month. She gave proper professional notice, said the appropriate things to the appropriate people, and departed without a message to Kwame. The seat she had occupied in the conference room had held a particular kind of confidence. When the room's center of gravity shifted, she recalculated and moved towards something else. That was the entirety of what she had ever been doing. Abina left a voicemail on a Wednesday afternoon in November. 4 minutes long. Naomi listened to 40 seconds of it, long enough to recognize its structure, which was an apology that contained no apology. She set the phone down. She did not return the call. Kwame called on a Tuesday evening in January. Naomi answered because Emeka might need something and she had not changed the contact label. Kwame said he had made mistakes. He said he could see that now. He said he was asking her to consider what they still had. His voice carried the same quality she had recognized in the conference room. Something stripped of performance, something closer to the man who had once stood with her on a balcony while Houston lay out around them both. She waited until he was finished. Then she said, "The number for the custody coordinator is in the agreement." She ended the call. Not with anger, with the particular finality of a woman who has already given this conversation every word it deserved. The custody claim had been withdrawn 2 weeks earlier. Jeffrey Ware had advised it, once the financial disclosure made his characterization of Naomi as dependent and emotionally unstable, unsustainable in any courtroom. The revised agreement came through in December. Naomi retained primary custody of Emeka. The word dependent appeared nowhere in the final documents. She noticed this the way you notice the end of a sound you have been living inside for so long, you had stopped recognizing it as noise. Emeka, in the weeks after the agreement was signed, stopped hiding his shoes under his bed and started leaving them by the front door, with the matter-of-fact ease of a child who has decided, without ceremony, that the house is safe again. Naomi saw this and understood it as his version of exhaling. Then something eased. She had decided to restore the Sugarland house in January. She called a contractor named David Emenike, and they walked the rooms together on a Saturday morning, her breath making small clouds in the unheated air. She pointed at what needed fixing, what she wanted changed, and what she wanted left exactly as it was. She told him she planned to live here. He told her he would have a quote by Wednesday. She was there on an evening in March when she opened the bottom drawer of the mahogany desk and took out the leather journal for the 3rd time. David's crew had been working on the house for 2 months by then. The study had been repainted the color of the original walls, which she had found documented in a receipt Kofi had kept in the same drawer. She opened the journal to the last entry and read the line, her father's line, the one she had first written in the back of a school notebook, then carried through a marriage and a kitchen in Meyerland and a conference room downtown and everything that came before and after. She read it now as something already fulfilled rather than something still becoming. Then she turned to the blank pages at the back of the journal, the ones that came after everything her father had written. She picked up her pen. She wrote, "I spoke it softly, Daddy, and I spoke it last." She set the pen down. She sat with it for a long while. Outside the Sugarland window, the evening arrived the way evenings do in that neighborhood, slowly, without announcement, as though it had all the time in the world. Quiet strength is not weakness mistaken for patience. It is power choosing its moment. The understanding that what you carry in private is not what others see, and that the difference between those two things is not a deficit, but a reserve. She was never unaware of what mattered. She had simply not yet been given a reason to count. If this story found you somewhere you needed to be found, if Naomi's patience and her father's quiet wisdom stayed with you, leave a comment below and tell us which moment hit you hardest. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from tonight? The Sugarland house glows against the evening, its porch light on, the wraparound veranda holding its familiar shape in the warm dark. Inside, the leather journal rests in the bottom drawer, where it has always been, holding both voices now, the father's and the daughter's. In the only silence that is truly full, the drawer is unlocked.